Rachel Klein had been missing for less than a week when deputies unlocked her apartment. Nothing was out of place, no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no scattered belongings. Her bed was neatly made. The kitchen counters were clean. It looked like she had simply stepped out and never returned. But in her bedroom, on the corner of her desk, was a thick, black-bound diary. It was open. The pen was still resting on the page, and the last entry was written less than 24 hours before she vanished. It wasn't a reflection or a list of errands. It was a record. Dates, times, street names, vehicle descriptions. And one phrase repeated over and over: the man in the blue truck. The entries went back months. She had noted where she saw him, how long he stayed, what he was wearing. In the margins, she had circled words like waited, followed, watched. Her car had been found earlier that morning on a rural stretch of Highway 706, driver's door ajar, keys in the ignition. No sign of Rachel, no sign of a struggle, just silence in every direction. To investigators, the diary changed everything. This wasn't just a missing person. It was a warning. One Rachel had been writing in real time. And now, the only person who could explain it was gone. Ashford, Washington, sits at the edge of Mount Rainier National Park, a small community surrounded by dense evergreens and winding two-lane roads. With fewer than 300 residents, it's the kind of place where people recognize every car that passes. Through Aunt Rachel Klein, 27, had lived there for just over a year. She worked as a second-grade teacher at a nearby elementary school and rented a one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store in the center of town. Known to neighbors as polite but private, she kept a predictable routine. Early mornings at school, evenings spent grading papers or jogging along the same rural route. Family lived 2 hours away in Tacoma, and friends described her as cautious, the kind of person who locked her doors even in broad daylight. She drove a silver 2012 Honda Civic, maintained in near-perfect condition, and rarely traveled far from home on weeknights. In the weeks before her disappearance, there were no reports of disputes, sudden financial trouble, or changes in behavior. But the diary found in her apartment would later reveal that during that time, Rachel believed someone had been watching her. And in her final entries, she named streets and dates with the precision of someone expecting that record to be found. On the evening of June 3, 2021, Rachel Klein left the school where she worked at 4:11 p.m., as captured on the parking lot's security camera. She stopped briefly at a grocery store in Eatonville at 4:37 p.m., purchasing milk, bread, and a bag of apples. Store surveillance confirmed she was alone. By 5:15 p.m., she was back in Ashford. A neighbor recalled seeing her carry groceries upstairs to her apartment. At 6:02 p.m., her phone data placed her at home, sending a single text to a coworker about an upcoming lesson plan. That was the last confirmed communication she made. At 8:41 p.m., a traffic camera on State Route 7 recorded her Honda Civic heading west. 10 minutes later, a gas station camera on Highway 706 caught her buying 2 bottles of water. She paid in cash and returned to her vehicle. No other person was seen approaching or leaving with her. The next record came from a dash camera belonging to a motorist traveling east on 706 at 9:15 p.m. It showed a silver sedan parked on the shoulder with its driver's door open. The headlights were off. When Rachel failed to appear for work the next morning, her school contacted her sister, who in turn called the Pierce County Sheriff's Office. Deputies began a welfare check at 11:02 a.m., starting at her apartment. The door was locked, and there were no signs of forced entry. By 7:12 a.m. that same morning, before the welfare check had even begun, a state highway maintenance worker had already spotted the silver Honda Civic on the shoulder of Highway 706. The driver's door was ajar, keys still in the ignition. There were no skid marks, no debris, and no signs of mechanical failure. The car's interior was clean, with only a half-empty bottle of water in the cup holder. The immediate search expanded to a 2-mile radius. foot teams combed the roadside and nearby forest. Drones were deployed to cover terrain not easily reached by foot. Search dogs tracked a scent for roughly 200 yards from the vehicle before it abruptly stopped at a gravel turnout, a spot large enough for another vehicle to park alongside. Investigators towed the car for processing. The exterior showed no fingerprints other than Rachel's. The interior was free of foreign DNA, and her phone, wallet, and purse were not inside. Back at her apartment, deputies secured the scene for a thorough search. The space was orderly, with groceries from the previous evening still in place. On her desk, next to a closed laptop, was the black-bound diary. It was open to a page dated June 2nd, one day before she vanished. In neat handwriting, Rachel had listed 7:42 p.m. Blue pickup, parked across street, engine running, and 8:03 p.m. Same truck moved to alley by hardware store. Earlier entries referenced other dates and times, with multiple sightings of the same vehicle. Some entries included partial license plate numbers. Others described a tall male driver wearing a baseball cap. The pattern in her notes suggested she had been watching this activity closely. Deputies boxed the diary as evidence. It would become central to the case, not only for what it said, but for what it implied, that Rachel had been monitoring someone's movements in the days and weeks before her disappearance. The scene offered no signs of forced removal from her home, no struggle in her car, and no obvious witnesses to her last movements. The only physical clue beyond the diary was the trail that ended abruptly at the gravel turnout, suggesting a transfer from her vehicle to another. By the end of the first 48 hours, the search had shifted from a local missing person report to a multi-agency investigation, and the contents of Rachel's diary were now being treated not as a side note, but as the primary lead. The investigation into Rachel Klein's disappearance was led by Detective Aaron Caldwell of the Pierce County Sheriff's Office. Her team began by reviewing the diary in detail. The earliest entry mentioning the man in the blue truck was dated March 14th, nearly 3 months before Rachel vanished. In total, there were 15 separate mentions of the vehicle across different dates and times, often noting it was parked near her apartment or following her jogging route. Detectives cross-referenced the partial license plate numbers Rachel had recorded with state motor vehicle records. Only one match appeared in the region, a 1998 blue Ford F-150 registered to a man named Daniel Reese, 42 years old, living in Eatonville. Reese had no major criminal record but did have a prior misdemeanor trespassing charge from 2017. Surveillance. Footage from around Rachel's apartment was limited, but a hardware store camera across the street captured the blue truck passing by multiple times in late May and early June. One clip, dated June 1st, showed the truck slowing as it approached Rachel's building, idling for several seconds before continuing. Investigators also pulled traffic camera data from Highway 706. At 9:10 p.m. on June 3rd, minutes before Rachel's car was seen abandoned, the blue Ford was recorded heading west toward the location where her Civic was later found. A second camera, 20 minutes later, captured the truck traveling back east. Search teams focused on the gravel turnout where the scent trail ended. Tire impressions were documented, showing 2 distinct patterns, one consistent with Rachel's Civic, the other with a larger pickup truck. No fresh footprints were found, but fragments of duct tape were recovered from the edge of the turnout. Forensic testing revealed a partial fingerprint on one fragment, matched through APHIS to Daniel Reese. On June 7th, detectives interviewed Reese at his residence. He denied knowing Rachel and claimed he had not been near Ashford on the night in Mighty Notitiu. Question. However, his truck was visible in the driveway, and a warrant allowed investigators to process it. Inside the truck bed, they found traces of soil matching samples taken from the turnout area, along with a single long brown hair consistent with Rachel's hair color. Phone records placed Reese's mobile device in the vicinity of Rachel's apartment on multiple evenings over the previous 2 months, including June 3rd. Location pings from that night showed a route that matched the truck's movements on camera, from Eatonville to Ashford, then to the turnout and back again. Digital forensics on Rachel's laptop revealed she had searched his license plate through a public records site on May 28th. In her diary, an entry dated that same night read, "Name confirmed. Reese, still watching." While these leads strengthened the case against Reese, they did not confirm Rachel's fate. Ground searches continued in wooded areas within a 10-mile radius of the turnout, focusing on old logging roads and overgrown clearings. Cadaver dogs alerted in one location near a creek bed, where investigators found a torn piece of fabric later identified as from the hoodie Rachel wore in the gas station footage. By June 15th, Detective Caldwell had compiled a working timeline of events. In the months prior to her disappearance, Rachel had repeatedly documented sightings of the same blue pickup in different locations connected to her daily routine. On the night she vanished, she left Ashford just before 9 p.m., was recorded buying water at the gas station minutes later, and her car was found abandoned soon after. Around the same time, the blue truck was seen heading toward the area, later returning in the opposite direction. Physical evidence linked Reese's vehicle to the turnout, and his phone location data aligned with the movements of both vehicles. With mounting evidence, detectives obtained a warrant for Reese's home and property. In a locked shed, they recovered a canvas tarp, more duct tape, and a spiral-bound notebook. The notebook contained handwritten notes of vehicle descriptions, jogging routes, and names of women, Rachel's among them. On June 18th, Daniel Reese was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and obstruction. He was booked into the Pierce County jail while investigators continued searching for Rachel. Public announcements confirmed the arrest but withheld specific evidence to preserve the integrity of the case. As the days passed, pressure mounted to locate Rachel, dead or alive. Then, a week later, a break came. Not from the turnout search, but from a trailhead 3 miles east, where a hiker found a buried plastic storage bin. Inside were personal items, including Rachel's wallet, phone, and the second water bottle she had purchased at the gas station. This discovery extended the search perimeter and brought a new urgency to the case. What investigators didn't yet know was that the most disturbing evidence, the piece that would shatter any remaining doubt, was still buried in the final pages of Rachel's diary. When investigators revisited Rachel's diary, they realized they had been treating it as a static record when, in fact, the entries appeared to form 2 separate timelines. The first was the obvious one: months of observations about the blue pickup and its driver. The second was more concealed, buried within the margins and in seemingly random capital letters scattered throughout certain words. Detectives suspected a pattern and sent the diary for forensic linguistic analysis. The result was a hidden message, spelling out short phrases across multiple entries. One in particular read, "Meet June 3rd. Turnout." The coded message suggested that Rachel had not simply been followed but had arranged some form of confrontation or meeting with the person she had been tracking. The theory that she might have gone willingly to the turnout shifted the investigative focus. They began looking at whether Rachel had set a trap of her own, or whether she had been manipulated into thinking the meeting would end the harassment. Around the same time, analysis of the spiral notebook recovered from Daniel Reese's. She'd revealed more than just names and vehicle descriptions. On the page listing Rachel, there was a date written in the corner: 6/3/21/2. That was the exact night and approximate time her car was found abandoned. The link between his notes and hers was now undeniable. But another discovery complicated the case. Several of the other names in Reese's notebook were linked to missing person reports from surrounding counties. Cases that had gone cold over the past 5 years. Detective Caldwell's team expanded their investigation into Reese's history, focusing on areas he had lived and worked. They found that in at least 3 of those cold cases, witnesses had reported a blue pickup near the disappearance sites. This new line of inquiry transformed the Rachel Klein case from a local abduction into a potential serial offender investigation. On June 27th, cadaver dogs were brought to a section of private forest land leased by Reese's employer. There, searchers located a shallow grave containing human remains later identified as a 31-year-old woman who had gone missing 2 years earlier. The find was a breakthrough in proving Reese's capacity for lethal violence, but it still left Rachel's whereabouts unknown. Then came the most critical piece of evidence from Rachel's own writing. A diary entry dated June 2nd, the day before she disappeared, described seeing the blue pickup parked outside her apartment for 3 hours without moving. She wrote that she was going to end this and that she had something to give him that he won't expect. Investigators couldn't determine what she meant by that, but the phrasing suggested she had planned some kind of action against Reese. A forensic sweep of Rachel's laptop uncovered encrypted files she had hidden in a subfolder. Once decrypted, they contained photographs of the blue pickup in various locations, some showing the driver's face clearly. There were also copies of emails she had drafted but never sent, addressed to a private investigator in Tacoma, describing Reese's movements and her suspicion that he was connected to other missing women. Prosecutors now had a far more complex case. Rachel had not been a passive victim. She had been actively collecting evidence against the man who would ultimately be charged in connection with her disappearance. This shifted the narrative entirely. What had initially appeared to be a stalking case that escalated into abduction was now understood to be a collision between an alleged predator and a determined target who had begun to fight back. On July the 2nd, a second search of the gravel turnout uncovered a buried tarp wrapped around several objects. Inside were women's personal effects, including a set of keys belonging to Rachel. The tarp also contained a small digital recorder, damaged but partially recoverable. Forensic audio technicians managed to restore several minutes of sound. The recording began with the sound of a vehicle door opening and Rachel's voice saying, "We're going to talk." The rest was unintelligible except for the sound of a struggle and a man's voice yelling, followed by the noise of gravel under tires as a vehicle drove away. This audio, combined with the diary's hidden message, was enough to solidify the theory that Rachel had agreed to meet Reese, possibly believing she could confront him or gather proof for law enforcement. Instead, it had ended with her being overpowered and taken. The twist for investigators was not only the layered nature of Rachel's own actions, but the expanding scope of Reese's suspected crimes. What started as a single missing person investigation was now potentially connected to multiple disappearances across the state. The Rachel Klein case was no longer just about finding her. It was about uncovering the full extent of Daniel Reese's activities and determining how many victims might be tied to the man in the blue truck. The trial of Daniel Reese began on February 6, 2022, at the Pierce County Superior Court. By that time, prosecutors had decided to proceed without a recovered body, charging him with first-degree murder, second-degree kidnapping, and multiple counts of unlawful imprisonment related to the other women in his notebook. Washington law allowed for a murder prosecution without a body if the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming, and the state's position was that Rachel Klein was dead, her remains concealed in a manner designed to prevent recovery. The prosecution opened by presenting the sequence of events leading to Rachel's disappearance, tying every step to corroborating evidence. Surveillance footage placed Reese's blue Ford F-150 near her apartment in the days before she went missing. Traffic cameras documented the truck traveling toward the location where Rachel's car was later found and then returning. Soil samples from the truck bed matched those from the gravel turnout. Forensic analysis of duct tape found at the scene yielded his fingerprint. The spiral notebook recovered from his shed contained Rachel's name, her routines, and the exact date and time she vanished. The state placed heavy emphasis on the diary. Jurors were shown pages with Rachel's detailed accounts of the blue pickup, the partial license plates, and the coded message referencing the turnout. The hidden capital-letter message, "Meet June 3rd turnout," was presented as evidence that Reese had lured her there or that she had been compelled to meet him. They also played the partially restored audio from the digital recorder found in the tarp, allowing jurors to hear the brief but chilling exchange and the sounds of the struggle. The defense attempted to undermine the diary's reliability, suggesting the coded message could have been interpreted differently and that Rachel may have met someone else entirely. They argued that the absence of a body left open the possibility she had left voluntarily. The defense also claimed that the soil and hair evidence could have been transferred in ways unrelated to a crime, and that the fingerprint on the duct tape could have come from legitimate use on his property. However, prosecutors countered with the broader pattern. They introduced evidence from the other cases tied to women in Reese's notebook, showing the similarities in their disappearances and the repeated sightings of his truck. Witnesses testified about seeing him in areas far outside his usual work, routes, sometimes late at night without a clear explanation. One of the most damaging moments came when the state introduced the recovered photographs from Rachel's encrypted laptop. The images of Reese's truck and face, taken at various locations over weeks, supported the argument that she had identified him as her stalker and was documenting his actions in preparation to involve law enforcement or a private investigator. The prosecution's closing argument focused on the convergence of evidence: the surveillance footage, the physical links to the turnout, the diary entries, the fingerprint, the notebook, and the audio recording, all pointing to Reese as the last person to see Rachel alive. They argued that the body's absence was the direct result of Reese's deliberate efforts to hide it. After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all major charges. Daniel Reese was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While the verdict delivered justice in the legal sense, it did not bring closure to Rachel's family, as her remains had still not been found. The trial also had broader consequences. Law enforcement agencies in surrounding counties reopened cold cases involving missing women, re-examining evidence for possible links to Reese. In at least 2 cases, the blue Ford pickup was confirmed to have been in the area at the time of the disappearance. For the community, the outcome reinforced the chilling reality that a person could be targeted and hunted in such a small, tight-knit area without immediate detection, and that the key to unraveling the truth had been a diary, kept meticulously by the victim herself. The conviction of Daniel Reese closed the legal chapter of Rachel Klein's case, but the physical search for her body continued long after the verdict. Teams returned to logging sites, riverbanks, and isolated forest trails year-round, following up on any tip that could lead to her recovery. None produced results. The absence of her remains remains the single unanswered question in an otherwise airtight prosecution. Rachel's diary, which began as a personal record of unease, became the central piece of evidence that built the case against her killer. Each page, each date, and each observation documented a pattern of surveillance that investigators later confirmed with independent evidence. Without it, the trail might have gone cold within days. In Ashford, the case became a reminder that rural isolation could both conceal danger and delay its detection. Residents who once left doors unlocked began installing cameras and motion lights. For local law enforcement, the case reinforced the importance of treating missing person reports as potential criminal investigations from the outset. Reese remains in prison with no possibility of release. Authorities continued to review cold cases from across the state for possible connections to him, and in at least 2 instances, his presence near other disappearances has been confirmed. The unanswered questions linger. Did Rachel intend to confront him that night, believing she could end the stalking on her own terms? Or was she lured into a meeting she thought was for another purpose entirely? What is certain is that her diary told the story she never had the chance to finish, and it was enough to speak for her when she no longer could.